conversation. We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
A very good morning live from College Green, just outside the Palace of Westminster. It is the start of an explosive week. Today is the day we find out the rules for the leadership contest. How long is it going to take? How many MPs will those candidates need to nominate them? And what would it all look like? We've got a stellar show coming up for you with some top political stars, all after the headlines.
9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Well, there are now 11 candidates in the running for the new leader of the Conservative Party. Liz Truss has become the latest senior cabinet minister to add her name to the growing list of contenders. Others on the list include the former Health Secretary Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt, ex-Chancellor Rishi Sunak, his successor Nadhim Zahawi, the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps and Trade Minister Penny Mordaunt. Well, Conservative MP Robert Jenrick thinks Mr Sunak could be an early favourite for the job.
Personally, I think it's best to focus on what that individual can really offer the country. And as I say, I think Rishi is the person of the greatest ability. He's an incredible hard worker. He's someone who has achieved enormous things already for the country. Front and centre will be the economy. And so choose the most economically literate person and the person that the public trust the most to deliver for them.
For work and pensions, Jonathan Ashworth says a Labour Party is the way forward to help end the cost of living crisis.
We can grow our economy, we could spread wealth and raise living standards sustainably while maintaining a stability in the cost of living with our growth plan. That contrasts with what Conservative candidates are promising, which would embed inflation and would see cuts to services. So there is a better way. I want your viewers to feel optimistic, because I'm optimistic that we don't have to do things the way we've been doing. We can do it in a better way for the future of this country.
Well, meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer is going to announce that Labour will fight the next election on growing the economy. In a speech he's going to give this morning in the North East, he'll pledge to promise a fresh start for Britain. The Labour leader plans to hit out at what he calls the hypocrisy of those who served in Boris Johnson's government. Now, Britain could have the hottest day of the year so far today. The Met Office has issued a heat health alert for parts of the UK as temperature predicted to hit 33 degrees this week. The alerts will stay in place until Friday. People are being asked to check on those vulnerable to extreme heat. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now let's head back to the briefing with Tom.
Well, hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Tom Harwood. It's a very busy week here in Westminster, although it's starting to feel a bit like the summer holidays. While the business of government is basically frozen, the business of Parliament, particularly on the Tory benches, rages on. The leadership contest officially kicks off with the 1922 committee deciding those all-important leadership rules today. Well, I'm delighted to be joined here on College Green, just outside Parliament, by John Rentoul, the chief political commentator for The Independent. First of all, John, what's your expectation for how the 22 is going to determine these rules?
Well, the key question is how many MPs will candidates have to find to nominate them to get on the first ballot, which we expect to take place on Wednesday. It was 8. You needed 8 MPs last time. And there's a strong feeling in the Parliamentary Conservative Party that it ought to be higher this time to winnow down that field.
Because of 10 candidates last time, it's too many. There are 10 or 11, depending on how you count them now. I suspect they'll put quite a high threshold on that, maybe 20 MPs, and that would probably narrow the field down to 5 or 6.
There's some speculation that it could be up to 36 MPs, 10% of the parliamentary party. Is this realistic, and who would this most damage and potentially most help?
I don't think it makes a lot of difference, actually. It makes a difference to how quickly the whole thing is over, because obviously if you start with fewer candidates, it takes less time to narrow them down to the final 2. And presumably speed would help the front runner, because Rishi Sunak has the most nominations, he's got the most momentum, he's the most to lose from things taking longer than otherwise would.
It's interesting looking at what these candidates have been putting out on social media. Particularly Rishi Sunak's campaign seems oh so polished, like it's been prepared for a long time, whereas...
Well, they've all been prepared for a long time, Tom. We know that. I mean, Rishi Sunak nearly became Prime Minister in January. He was ready to go then. It's no secret that he's had a campaign team.
They've all had a campaign team. They've all been canvassing support with MPs. So it's no surprise that all their videos look incredibly professional and as if they've been worked on for months, which they have.
Well, Sajid Javid put out a video today from his last run to be Tory party leader, saying, here's what I prepared earlier. Well, I think there are some people who clearly have not been preparing for as long as others here.
Well, it may
help them to look as if they haven't been preparing for as long as others. So a bit of contrived amateurishness is no bad thing. And Penny Mordaunt obviously got into trouble with using clips in her video that she had to edit out. So it hasn't been completely smooth on all candidates' part.
Now, there are some candidates who have been really raking in those all-important nominations, and some who haven't, these parliamentary backers. If you were to be a betting individual...
Which I'm not, I don't bet on politics.
Which you're not.
But if I were, I would bet on Rishi Sunak to win this thing.
And who would be his challenger? We're assuming Rishi gets through to the final
Liz
2.
Truss. I think Penny Mordaunt's really struggled with the what is a woman question. I think she tried to put that right yesterday with a thread on Twitter explaining her position, but once you're explaining, you're losing. Nadeem Zahawi has, I think, done his credibility a lot of harm with his in and out support for Boris Johnson, taking the chancellorship and then a few hours later saying that the Prime Minister should go. So I think Liz Truss is the one to challenge Rishi, and I think she'll give a good go for it.
Really interesting there. One sort of establishment lane in Rishi Sunak, one sort of challenger, perhaps more on the right of the party in Liz Truss.
Liz Truss isn't on the right of the party. She's a Remainer, Tom.
She's on fiscal issues. On fiscal issues,
no. Fantasy economics is not right wing. I'm sorry. Tax cuts, unfunded tax cuts, are not right wing.
Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan might disagree with you.
No, the Thatcherite position is to balance the books and then cut taxes.
Well, John Rentoul, thank you for that overview
of what on earth is going on this week. We'll follow it with very, very closely. But now, before we move on to exactly what is going on ahead of this week, I'm delighted to be able to talk to some individuals who are backing some of these strong contenders to be the next Prime Minister. Chris Philp was, until recently, a minister in the Department for Media, Culture and sport and is backing Sajid Javid. Chris, thanks for joining us. Why are you backing Saj?
Good morning, Tom. There's a few reasons. The first of those is integrity. I've known Sajid quite a while. He's a man of outstanding integrity, which I think is particularly important at this time. Secondly, he's hugely competent, whether as Home Secretary, Chancellor of the Exchequer or Health Secretary. In each of those jobs, he did a really effective and capable and competent job of work. I think thirdly, he's got the right values for this country. He believes in free markets, he believes in low regulation, and he believes in cutting taxes. Not cutting taxes after you've got economic growth, but cutting taxes in order to create economic growth, which is why, just as you said a second ago, just as Ronald Reagan did and Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson did in the 1980s, because if you, for example, cut corporation tax, not increase it, but cut corporation tax, that will stimulate economic growth and it will increase wages, it'll create more jobs and it will raise more tax revenue. And that's not sort of made up. We saw that happen in the early 2010s when George Osborne, as Chancellor, cut corporation tax from the 28% bequeathed by Gordon Brown down to 19%, and not only did that lead to growth and additional jobs, but it also raised more money for the Exchequer, because the tax receipts from corporation tax in that period, I'm going to try and remember the figures, it was roughly went up from about £30 billion in 2010 up to about £53 billion by around about 2015, 2016. So there is clear evidence that cutting, for example, corporation tax does work, does stimulate the economy, and it actually yields a higher tax take, to fund schools and hospitals.
It's a compelling argument that many Conservatives will instinctively agree with.
How damaged is Sajid Javid by the fact that it was only a few months ago that he, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak stood up in number 9 Downing Street, called a press conference that I sat at, announcing a new tax, a hike in national insurance, billions of pounds taken from the pay packets of individuals and indeed from the businesses that pay them. How does he recover from that?
Well, first of all, it's the job of the Health Secretary to run the health service and to spend the money being raised, which he was doing very effectively. The question of how you raise that money, if you remember, it was a matter of debate between the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and the then Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. They debated that, to put it politely, quite heatedly, but that was a matter for them. Raising that money was something which they decided. The Sajid Javid side of the equation as Health Secretary was how to spend it. What he's now saying is if he gets a chance to run his own government with his own policies, then that national insurance increase is something he would look to reverse and cut income tax and get corporation tax down to 15 pence in the pound, down from 19 where it is now.
Does he think the way that the economy has been run by Rishi Sunak over the last couple of years has been going in the wrong direction?
Look, I'm not going to get into attacking colleagues, my colleagues in government. I was a minister until just 4 or 5 days ago. I'm not going to get into attacking colleagues and attacking what's happened in the past. I'm not going to do that at all. What I'm going to do is say that I believe firmly in Sajid's positive vision for the future, which includes a low tax, light touch regulated economy that will grow and will, I think, benefit the whole United Kingdom, as well as ultimately generating more tax revenue for the Exchequer, because a growing economy yields more tax. And we saw that very clearly during the 1980s when Nigel Lawson cut the top rate of tax, if you remember, from I think it was it 83p in the pound at the very beginning. If you put to one side the surcharge, he cut that from 83p to 60p and then down to 40p. And as he did that, the amount of tax paid by those top rate taxpayers actually went up. And not only that, the proportion of the total income tax bill they paid went up as well. So there's example after example. I've given 2 examples already of cuts in tax rates leading to growth and higher tax receipts for the Exchequer to fund public services. So there's pretty compelling evidence, I would say. And that's before you start looking at the back of Arthur Laffer's napkin at the Laffer curve.
This is an extraordinary
economic pitch. It seems like every single candidate is putting forward ideas on tax and spend, that the economy is the central focus of this leadership campaign. What are the other issues that Sajid wants to bring to the table?
Well, the economy is important because of the cost of living challenges we face, and that is, you talk to people in my constituency or up and down the country, they will say the same thing. So it's right that we focus on these genuine, free market ideas for getting Thatcherite ideas for getting our economy moving. I think beyond that, Britain's place in the world is very important. It's important we stand up to aggressors like Russia, as Boris Johnson's government has very commendably been doing. I think we've got to make sure we wage the war on woke, because, you know, children, I've got children, 9-year-old twins, I don't meant to be indoctrinated with lefty sort of propaganda in the classrooms. I don't want to see free speech at universities getting stifled. So those issues are of fundamental, I think, social and cultural importance as well.
Well, Chris Philp, thanks so much for joining us here on the briefing this morning. I suppose we'll get into the arguments about the online harms bill at another time, but thanks for joining us. Well, I'm delighted to say that we can now be joined by a high-profile backer of yet another candidate. George Eustice is the Secretary of State at DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, of course, and is a high-profile backer of Grant Shapps, apologies there, Grant Shapps, who earlier today released this campaign video. Well, Grant Shapps there making a pitch to Conservative MPs, which, after all, is what this leadership race is all about at this stage. George Eustice, it seems like a peculiar novelty that a leadership candidate is actually talking to the people who will be electing them.
Well, obviously, it's the important thing to do. We don't have a when they've got the confidence of the parliamentary party and Parliament in general. And so absolutely, it's for the next 2 weeks, it's very much about the members of Parliament, and right that we should focus on that. And the reason I'm supporting Grant Shapps is I think we need someone with experience, and he's served under government under 3 different Prime Ministers. We also need somebody who's a good campaigner and a good communicator, and Grant Shapps over these last 2 years frequently put out on the media to deal with some of those difficult situations and can cope with anything that's thrown his way. And thirdly, just sitting around the cabinet table with him now for over 2 years, I just think he's got good judgment. I've seen his interventions on particular crises like COVID, and sat through COBRA sort of emergency meetings with Grant, and I've just been impressed by his judgment, and I think that's why it's important that I support him and that we try to get him in that role.
He's a bit of an outside candidate in this race. Wasn't considered to be a particular contender until very recently. What makes you think that he's someone that can get, firstly, on the ballot if that threshold is quite high, and secondly, right the way through to those final 2?
Well, look, there are currently around 12 different candidates, and of course only 2 will get through. And my experience of previous leadership campaigns is you don't actually know exactly which way people are going to vote. I think it's fair to say that Rishi Sunak is the front runner at the moment, but front runners can encounter difficulties. Every campaign will be talking to lots of MPs. There will be lots of MPs who haven't really made their mind up at the moment. I would say that this is, wide open until we get to that final 2 and the runoff at the end of next week. And we're working hard to persuade people he's the right candidate. And for me, I don't believe MPs should sit on their hands and wait and see which way the wind's blowing. It's important that they get out there, say which candidate they think is best. And I think that Grant Shapps is the best candidate in this contest.
It's interesting listening to the pitch of Grant Shapps, which is all about competence and delivery. We haven't heard that much policy from Grant Shapps yet, though, on issues of taxation, of economic management, or indeed of social issues either. What does Grant Shapps believe in?
Well, he has set out yesterday that when it comes to those important economic issues, first of all, he'll have an emergency budget if he becomes leader and Prime Minister. There will be a star chamber on the budget to work out what we can do. But he set out yesterday that he thinks we should bring forward that tax reduction, particularly for the lowest paid, because there is pressure on household incomes at the moment. He's also said that he thinks we shouldn't move to increase corporation tax at the moment, because that could drive away business investment at just the time we need it. So he set out some of his early thoughts in that area, but look, no candidate should make pledges that are so precise that actually they fetter the ability of a future government to consider things properly.
In terms of funding these potential tax cuts, does Grant Shapps believe that to some extent short-term borrowing is worth it in order to create that economic growth that then funds that shortfall?
Well, what he believes is that actually we can go further to make savings in government spending. Government spending as a percentage of GDP has risen inexorably. It's currently at a very high level. And what he's demonstrated with some of the agencies, for instance, around the Department for Transport, is you can digitise some of these functions and actually remove the need for headcount. Government at the moment's got a big challenge underway to try to reduce overall headcount in government anyway. And if we can introduce some of those digital approaches, we could probably reduce costs and save some money. And that's one of the things he's highlighted as a priority for him.
Now, just finally, of course, the country was beset by strikes in recent weeks. These were transport strikes. Grant Shapps was the Transport Secretary. Did he fail in terms of trying to stop those strikes, and might that damage his chances?
No, I don't think see it that way at all. I think you should judge people not by what's thrown their way while they're in a particular position, but how they deal with it. And what I see in Grant Shapps, and have seen over the last 2 years of his time in cabinet, is that he really grips problems that are thrown his way, and he works to resolve them. And I think that's exactly what he's done. Of course, there's pressure for pay rises, so we do have some strikes. We shouldn't say that's his fault. We should actually judge him by how he's addressed some of these challenges, and I think he's done that well.
Well, George Eustace, thank you very much for joining us this morning live on College Green outside Parliament. Really, really fascinating stuff there. And now, just finally today, I'm delighted to be able to be talking about exactly what is going on with the former Prime Minister, because Lord Moylan is someone who was one of the most enthusiastic supporters of Boris Johnson right until the bitter end, and can join us now here on College Green. Lord Moylan, why did you support Boris right until those final hours?
I think Boris was a great and transformational Prime Minister, and I think that we will come to regret the fact that we've defenestrated him. But those are issues which will be looked at more carefully in the future with a more historical and reflective eye. At the moment, we've got to focus on where we're going next. I've decided that I am going to support with my vote, and I only get a vote like every other member. I'm going to support Suella Braverman because I think not only policies are important here, and she's got the right policies on the Union, on Northern Ireland, on the economy, but she's also got the right character. Character is very important here. And when you look at the amount of abuse and rubbish that's been thrown at her over the last couple of years, attacking her as a woman, as a lawyer, as a politician, and the way she stood up to it without complaint, I think she's the person who can actually drive things through in the very short time we've got before the next general election.
It seems like Suella Braverman is running sort of in the same lane as Kemi Badenoch, two individuals from the same sort of side of the party saying relatively similar things. Given that the threshold to nominate candidates is going to be raised, we assume, today, do you think there should be an accordance between these two candidates?
Well, I think Kemi Badenoch is a very interesting person, and I think one day she would make a very good Prime Minister. But apart from the fact that she's participated in taking a very strong stance on cultural issues, which I tend to support, and I'm generally with her on that, apart from that, I'm not aware of what her views really are, or what experience she's got of dealing with Northern Ireland, dealing with the Union, and the broad swathe of getting the economic fundamentals right, whereas I think Suella has actually got more experience of that, more ministerial experience, and will be a stronger character on those two things, on those main things.
When it comes to how candidates reacted to Boris Johnson in the last 5-6 months, when it comes to those candidates who resigned, those candidates who told him to resign, has that influenced your thinking here? Because, of course, Suella Braverman did, while she remained in the cabinet, call on Boris Johnson to go at the start of last week.
I think I'm in touch with quite a lot of party members, and I think party members are a bit, well, more than a bit dismayed, are really quite dismayed at the events of the last week or so. And that's true even of those who thought that Boris's time had come. It has been a bit of a shambles, and people have got themselves into all sorts of positions that I think they'll probably come and regret. But as I say, the important thing now is not what happened last week. That's important to look back on and learn lessons from. And I think Boris will come out much better than people say now. The important thing now is to think about the future, to think about the fact that we have a general election 2 years or so away, whenever it is, and that we have to have the right person who actually completes the Brexit process and delivers the radical policies that we promised people at the general election in 2019, which they're still looking for us to deliver. And I think Suella can do that.
Is it fair to say that the government over the last 2 years got knocked off course, that the economic policy, particularly of the government, has not been that conservative, and that now potentially is a chance to get the party back to some of those Thatcherite principles?
Well, we know what knocked the government off course over the last couple of years. It's a combination of the pandemic and then economically the economic effects of the war in Ukraine. The question is, how did the government react to that? And it is dismaying that we have one candidate, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, who appears to have spent most of his time in government insisting on higher taxes at a time when we're going into recession. No other country in the world is ramming taxes up at this rate. And they've all had the same experience. And who was blocking our trying to sort out Northern Ireland and reintegrate and stand up for the United Kingdom as a whole. And that's very, very dismaying that he was doing that. And he was joined in it, I understand, by Michael Gove, at least on the latter. I don't know what Michael Gove's view on taxes are. And Michael Gove has come out now and said he wants Kemi Badenoch. I mean, it's all the wrong people, if you see what I mean, Tom. We want a clean break with those economic policies and with that dithering about Europe.
And yet Suella Braverman was in the cabinet throughout all of that time, and one of the criticisms levied at some of these people who were in the cabinet, whether it's Jacob Rees-Mogg, Liz Truss, Suella Braverman, is they might have said this stuff around the cabinet table. But when it came to actually putting forward a stand, saying in public, maybe even resigning as Lord Frost did, they didn't step up to the plate.
Well, Suella put her views, because she's the Attorney General, so she gives the government legal advice, and you put legal advice in writing, and she's put her views down repeatedly that we are in a position to take firm action on Northern Ireland. We are legally sound in doing that. I mean, that is a stance that others so far haven't picked up, but she's been driving that, and I think her views on that are very clear. I don't, of course, sit round the cabinet table, and I'm not a fly on the wall, so I don't know who says exactly what about economic matters. I'm fairly sure Kip Malthouse has been quite firm on all of this, but he's not a candidate, of course. But you know, I can't tell you what they've said about that. But resigning is something you do in extreme circumstances to achieve something, I assume.
In our final 30 seconds, is it conservative? Is it right? Is it potentially the way things are going that we need to sacrifice some short-term balanced books in order for longer-term growth? Is that a trade-off that is worth making?
It's a trade-off that's not only necessary and worth making, but it's a trade-off that will only work if we get the economic fundamentals right. And that includes reinvigorating the economy with a degree of entrepreneurial spirit and less regulation, and having fewer big companies who are dependent on large contracts from the government the whole time, but actually go out there and compete in an internationally competitive market. So we need to encourage that, as well as get the tax and monetary policy side right.
Well, Lord Moylan, thanks so much for joining us here outside Parliament this morning. It's going to be a really fascinating week, and we really appreciate your time. That's it for the briefing this morning. I'm afraid we'll be back 9:30 tomorrow, of course, with yet more news on this leadership race. See you then.
Looking ahead to today's weather, the UK is going to be dry, sunny for many of us with blue skies and some hot sunshine. Let's take a look at the details. So at lunchtime in the southwest of the UK, there's going to be plenty of blue skies, hot sun. UV levels are going to be really high and temperatures are rising to the mid-20s. It's going to be hot and sunny across London and the southeast of England as we approach midday. Temperatures around 27 Celsius. There's going to be sunshine in abundance across Wales this lunchtime. Perhaps a little low cloud lapping onto north-facing coasts. Here will be about 24 degrees Celsius. In the Midlands, a hot and sunny day. Hardly a cloud in the sky with very high UV levels. Temperatures rising to around 27 Celsius by midday. Wind staying quite light. What about the northeast of England? Plenty of sunshine here, though it may turn quite hazy as high cloud moves in from the north. Feeling warm with temperatures around 26 degrees, a little bit cooler towards the coast. Across Scotland, lots of sunshine here as well. It's going to be quite hazy though. Winds will be nice and light with temperatures approaching the low 20s. In Northern Ireland, it's going to be dry and sunny heading towards lunchtime. Quite hazy here too with high cloud. That will move in from the west. Temperatures around 22 degrees at lunchtime. So across the UK, it's going to be dry, hot and sunny for most of us. Rain will arrive in the far northwest later.